Okay, thank you, everyone. Can you put your headphones on in order to hear the talk? Thanks so much.
Will we be able to hear Graham?
Yes. Huh?
Will we be able to hear Graham without
Yes, we
headphones?
will. So thank you so much. Yeah, welcome to the last panel of the event. I hope everyone's been having a fantastic Future Fabrics Expo. I certainly have. The degree of innovation is really quite staggering and much needed. The panel now is our water footprint from compliance to opportunity. It is an absolutely crucial subject. We are obviously currently in a climate and ecological emergency, and water is going to become absolutely fundamental, one of our most precious resources. On the water footprint stand, we have 4 billion people facing water insecurity, 2.2 lakh access to clean water right now. Water is absolutely fundamental to a healthy biodiversity, healthy ecosystems, basically the future of the planet. I have the most amazing panel with me today. Here on my left, Ioana Dobrescu is Managing Director at Water Footprint Implementation. For Water Footprint Implementation works with companies and governmental organizations to implement tailored solutions that reduce water footprints and benefit communities, a really, really sorely needed technology. Phil Mansour here has been actively involved with disruptive technology for more than 3 decades, and he is now CEO and Director of MTiX. It's a material science company focused on sustainability substrate synthesis. I will be asking Phil to explain what that means because I don't know. It's about changing the basic core and nature of the fabric. And then on our screens here as well, we have Graham Stewart, EVP at Fibre 52, both a process and chemistry that uses bio-friendly tech to revolutionize the dye stages for cotton fabrics. Cotton, obviously, one of the most widely used fibers in the fashion industry. But and before I start, sorry to ramble a bit, but I really want to draw attention to the backdrop, which is so stunningly beautiful. And again, it's about water. It's been the backdrop to all of the talks, all of the events here today. It's a photograph of mudflats, tidal areas in Norfolk, taken by an aerial photograph taken by a photographer called Mike Page. And just the most perfect backdrop to the last panel that we have here today. It's all about water. If we don't take care of our water systems, this is not something that will exist for our children. So I'm going to start really with Ioana, because I want Ioana to talk to us about the main issues around water use and pollution in the fashion industry, possibly beyond.
Sure.
Thank you.
Sure. Hi, everyone. So in preparation for the session today, I was looking for some numbers that describe water consumption in the textile and apparel sector. And I found out a study from the World Bank that said in 2015, almost 80 billion cubic meters of water were used by the sector a year, with 5 billion cubic meters just in the dyeing process. And it also said that the textiles and apparel sector contributes with 20% to the pollution of freshwater resources in the world globally. And that's also expected to double by 2030, right? But even for me, these numbers are very difficult to comprehend. They're very big numbers, right? What do these numbers mean? So I thought, let's give a more practical example, something that helps us illustrate the impact of this industry. So what you see here behind me, you might wonder, what are these boats doing in the desert? Well, it's not a desert. It's the bed of what used to be the Aral Sea. Now, what you see here is a time lapse of the Aral Sea disappearing for the past 30 years. For those of you who don't know where the Aral Sea is, it's located between Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan. And it's not a sea, it's a lake. It used to be the 4th biggest lake in the world, twice the size of Belgium. And why is it disappearing? Because the 2 rivers that were feeding this huge lake were diverted mainly for irrigating one crop, for cotton production. We did a study a few years ago on water consumption in the whole Central Asian region. And what we found out is that 40% or even more than 40% of the water resources in the region are used to irrigate cotton. And not only that, but we also saw huge inefficiencies. 50% of the water that was abstracted or diverted from those rivers to irrigate cotton was lost. It was not effectively used to grow cotton, but it was lost through bad management practices of farms. We also see that the rivers that are now used to, or the water that's being used from the rivers to irrigate in the region, they're also decreasing because the glaciers from the Himalayas that are feeding these two rivers are melting. So there's less water availability. We also expect increased demand for cotton and for other types of fibers. And we also see new emerging pollutants. I was talking to somebody earlier today who said, I really don't like these numbers that say a cotton t-shirt takes 2,700 liters of water to produce, or that a pair of jeans takes 10,000 liters of water to produce. They're not nice numbers, but they are true. They represent global averages. And that's because in some regions of the world, even though cotton is being produced maybe more efficiently in terms of water, in other regions, it's being produced very inefficiently. But you also have to place it into context, because if you only say cotton is thirsty and you don't compare it with other fibers, you get the wrong picture. I've often seen in the media saying that polyester is better than natural fibers than cotton because it has a smaller water footprint, which is not true, because if you take into consideration the pollution that takes place from produced water when you extract crude oil and you process it and you turn it into the polyester fiber, then the water footprint is bigger than for natural fibers. So you always need to be able to compare and to know what sort of data was used to communicate these numbers. And we also know that from polyester fibers, we now have a new problem, the microplastics pollution. So we have a real cocktail of issues. We have overconsumption, inefficient water management in farm practices. We have less water availability due to climate change. We have new emerging pollutants. But I also know we have new solutions, and that's why we're here.
They're really staggering statistics. And I know from talking to you just now that you've worked with other sectors and other industries, and fashion is pretty new for you. I mean, were you taken by surprise by these stats?
A bit, but not a lot. So with the company that I work for, we've been doing this sort of research for quite a while.
Yeah.
I think the first data that came out on cotton already originates from 20 years ago. Yeah. And of course, as an individual that likes to wear clothes, I also have a personal interest in knowing if my clothes are made sustainable, if they have a negative impact. And I also know that a lot of the water footprint associated with the sector actually comes from agriculture, right? Cotton is also a type of agriculture.
Yeah.
And we also know that agriculture contributes with a large water footprint to the global water consumption.
Yeah. Quite interested. Well, actually looking at these devastating images, of course, it's not just a landscape here that's being destroyed, but it's all the cultures and all the peoples who rely on these water sources for their living, but also, it's really a devastating picture that we've seen here. I'd also like to sort of, there was a recent study sort of put out by Planet Tracker. The study was called Exposing Water Risk, and it showed that 90% of the fashion brands that they covered do not disclose any water-related risks in their documentation. So even for sustainable fashion, this is still a newish area. And I think the fact that you're here says so much about the curation, that you haven't been here before, and yet you're finally here at Future Fabrics Expo, which means that we know that water is an issue that's going to be coming up. But in terms of these solutions, we know they're solutions. This is something that's true throughout the fashion industry. I heard it on one of the panels. The solutions are out there already. So let's profile two of them here. We've got Phil, we've got Graham, but let's start with you, Phil. Let's talk about the solutions that MTiX offer, because when I looked at the LCAs, the life cycle analysis, I was amazed at how much water your process can save.
Absolutely. I want to comment on what's on the screen right now just for a moment,
Yeah,
because if you didn't hear And if you're not horrified, if you look at the left-hand side of this, that's the 4th largest lake in the world at one point that's gone. What I see is a blue planet becoming like a Mars. And if this isn't a warning sign for everybody, everybody needs to wake up and see that it's not the 4th largest lake. It's a great example of what happens when you don't respect the one thing that creates life and where life started on the planet with water. And so, let's talk about solutions, but I'm sitting here horrified at this loop that keeps going in front of me, because that's not the only water on the planet that's going away in those 3 decades.
Yeah. Elon Musk doesn't have to go to Mars. He just needs to stay on this planet long enough.
Yes, I mean, it's scary.
Yeah.
So MTiX is a surface synthesis company, and we have a machine that changes fabric. It goes in one side and comes out the other different, and it uses a laser-generated plasma to change the fabric with a number of inert gases and give it certain properties. In the preparation for dyeing algorithm that we have, it's literally digital scouring. And so in a traditional process, which is on the right-hand side of the screen, you would wash the fabric, and then you'd add chemicals like bleach and other chemicals to prepare it for dyeing, and then you would go through the dyeing process. About half the water in the dyeing process is often used for the prepare for dyeing process. And so sometimes change doesn't happen with a complete solution. Sometimes it's step by step. And so with MLSE, we can reduce up to 98% of the water in this step. Now, let me give you a feel for how much that is. For 470 kilos of fabric, you might traditionally use 30,000 liters of water, and that roughly makes 500 meters of fabric, depending upon the weight of the fabric. So roughly 30 liters of water in the dyeing process per meter. And that's not just water. That's heated water that's spun in a washer for 4 to 6 hours and treated with chemicals that has to be washed itself before releasing back into the environment. So in this process with our partner RDD in Portugal, we save 15,000 liters, or half that water. So again, sometimes it's not about changing the entire process. Sometimes it's about just changing enough to make a difference, and then allowing other technologies to come along and build upon that to make even more of a difference. And I think Graham is going to talk about, the cotton process and pre-weaving and pre-us. Mm-hmm. But I think the message I have is, we can't pretend there aren't solutions. These aren't labs. These machines exist. Graham's solution exists, and they're scalable. So we can make change today. It might be an inconvenient price for someone, but if we don't make change, we'll continue to lose lots of lakes. Different parts of the process, save different this particular slide talks about a 97% reduction. These are staggering numbers. This plant in Portugal, if they fully adopt it for all of their fabric, saves about 100 million liters of water, give or take, a year. And that's just one facility. And so the reality is there are solutions, and as I say, there are no competitors here. On my planet, I need all of these solutions to work. I don't want to displace any of them. I want more. I want this conference to be 10 times the size or 100 times the size, so that we have solutions to save on toxic chemicals as well as water.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that there are no competitors here, and there is not a single store, there's not a single exhibitor here that does not have some kind of interaction with water. Graham, I'd love to hear from you about Fibre 52, if that's possible. Hi.
Sure. Hi. Thanks for virtually inviting me on the panel. I'm joining you from Charleston, South Carolina in the US today. Yeah, Fibre 52 does focus a great deal on implementing, water saving in cotton and cellulosic textile production. And as Phil has just alluded to, is the enormous usage of water in textile processing. My daily life is to deal with most of the big mills around the world. Putting that in perspective, today I'll be speaking with a mill that processes 2.5 million kilos of cotton per week. You can't even put in numbers the amount of water that uses. And there are lots of figures out there as to water usage. It's not easy to get your head around it, but as Phil has said there, it's just enormous the amount of water that is used. And as Ioana said, cotton's a big deal. I think it's the second largest fiber on earth after polyester. In value, probably bigger than polyester. I don't really know the figures, but it's under increasing scrutiny for the enormous amount of water that's used. And let me introduce Fibre 52, which is a patented bio-based process, because not only does cotton in being processed use an enormous amount of water, there's an enormous amount of heavy chemical used. So what I wanted to do, and I started this about 2.5 years ago, is to get caustic soda out of processing cotton, which in itself is really difficult, because still 90% of the mills around the world use caustic soda day in, day out. With Fibre 52, we eliminate that completely. It's also a much faster process, so we're using less temperature, much less time. In the temperature field, we're using around 35 degrees centigrade less. So that in itself, in heating and cooling and so on, takes much less time. These bioproducts that I'm using, they're bioproducts, and they're also catalysts. The catalysts speed up the processing, and the products themselves are pretty much all out of the food industry. Not a lot of these, before I started, were actually used in textiles. So we as a company have gone from 2.5 people a year ago to 18 today, mainly in administration, and then we're adding another 2 next month, and so we go. And the reason we're growing so quickly is that there's legislation coming down the track here that we all see. And, we're working with brands and mills alike to make a positive implementation. I think that obviously I'd like to talk about water as part of this process, because as Phil has mentioned, as I see in machinery every day, Fibre 52 is a drop-in solution. So we work with machinery around the world that's just standard processing machinery, and we just replace the heavy chemicals that are used, but we also save a great deal of water in those machines. And I don't want to get too technical, but what happens, maybe half the world's machines with a 10-to-1 liquor ratio. If you look at that, taking that liquor ratio, if you process 1,000 grams of cotton, that machine's using 10,000 liters of water per bath. And there's up to 10 dye baths used, which is in dyeing and in washing off. Washing off's a big, bad process. Around the world, I would say 70% of people I deal with are using what's called an overflow method, where the water just keeps on running until the dye stuff's all cleared off and so on. We don't do that. We cut that down to about 4 or 5 baths, which is saving, just in a small machine, as I say, within an hour or two, you're saving 50,000 liters of water. So multiply that up with the guys that we're working with who are doing 5 million pounds or 2.5 million kilograms per week, of which there are many. And then, the figures are just staggering.
Yeah.
But I think the good news, as I said, is that we are making progress. There's that legislation is arriving. Brands, retailers, and mills are getting together, to make those saving initiatives, to make them a reality. It's actually happening, and we're able to do that in existing machinery. In parts of the world where water is very, very scarce. I mean, even drinking water is scarce in a lot of the places where cotton's processed. So it's very, very important, to say that we are managing to save water. And yes, there's a long way to go, but there's some real positive work going on around the world.
And I, just listening to both of you actually talk about it, it's not just water use, is it? It's about cleanliness of water. It's about it's about water pollution as well. So that the issue of water is not just, we're going to save it here, but it's going to be, we've got to keep it clean over here as well. And both of you address that in some way. I actually kind of like some stats. This 2,700 litres of water to make a cotton T-shirt. It is a little bit shorthandy, but I give talks in schools, and sometimes I say to the kids it takes 2,700 litres of water to make one cotton T-shirt, and then I show them what a single litre of water looks like, and that's that. So for a single cotton T-shirt, if we need 2,700 litres of water to make a single cotton T-shirt, and then you go into your closest Zara and you see all the T-shirts out there, it actually is really, really, really mind-boggling. And again, I'll come back to the climate emergency. And we know, for example, in the Horn of Africa, about 100,000 people have died due to lack of water, due to prolonged drought. And if I said to any one of those people, we are using 2,700 litres of water on one T-shirt, I think that'd be it's a climate justice issue for me. Yeah. So just coming on, Graham, you touched upon it, and I think this is a great thing. And Ioana, you were bringing it up in our pre-panel chats. Without regulatory or reputational pressure, there is not going to be action within the industry. Even if individuals within the industry want to act, it's difficult for them to act. But like Graham said, we do have legislation coming through. Beginning this year, by 2026, 50,000 companies in the EU will need to report according to the new Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive on various ESG topics, and that does include water, of course it will. And so I'd love to talk to you, Ioana, about what the implications of that legislation are going to be, regulation are going to be, and how your tool can help brands meet some of those targets.
For sure. Indeed, in an earlier panel today on sustainability and market and communication around it, it was a great panel, wonderful speakers. I never heard water mentioned once. It was only about climate. And that's because climate or CO2 emissions have been regulated. Water hasn't so far, but it is becoming regulated, thank God. So indeed, from beginning with this year, almost 50,000 companies in the EU will have to start reporting on various ESG issues, including water. They will have to start reporting on quantitative metrics, so looking at how much water they're consuming, also on how much water they're polluting, and various other metrics. But they will also have to report qualitatively on what are their impacts, what are their risks, opportunities in the value chain. Not just in the direct operations where the quantitative metrics are focused, but also in the whole value chain. They will have to set up targets for water reduction. They will have to create strategies for managing water resources in their operations and supply chain. So that's wonderful to hear. But we also know that a lot of these companies just do not have the data. From our experience engaging with companies, we know they simply don't know. Sometimes they don't even have the water bill in their head offices. So what are they going to do? Well, one tool that they can use is this calculator that Belle mentioned that we developed through a European project called REWAFT. And the calculator helps textile processors to get an estimate of how much water they're consuming, even when they lack data. So if they only have the volumes of the fiber, the type of fiber that they're processing per year, and the processes it undergoes, be it spinning or dyeing or finishing, we can provide you with an estimate of your water footprint. Of course, if you also have the option to input your own data. So if you do know how much water you're abstracting versus consuming, maybe you know how much wastewater you're generating and what's the effluent quality, right? The quality of the discharged wastewater. You can input your own company data and you get a more specific, more relevant number. But if you don't, we can provide you with an estimate. But in our exercise, in creating the calculator, looking for data to feed to the calculator, we also saw that for some aspects, for some processes, you do have studies. We carried our own studies on the water footprint of cotton farming, on polyester, on viscose. But specifically for the process of spinning or for so many dyeing technologies out there, there's no consistent or structured data that we could fit into the calculator. And in some cases, we had to rely on a single study case from a single mill or from a single region. So of course, that's not representative enough. We also, Belle, you already mentioned companies were required to disclose. I wanted to mention some data from the CDP questionnaire. Maybe you're familiar with the global nonprofit Carbon Disclosure Project. They also started on carbon and then moved to include water in their voluntary questionnaires. So they send out these voluntary questionnaires, and a few years ago, they also asked fashion and apparel brands to disclose on water. They reached out to, I think, almost 140 companies. Only half of those replied, so only half of those gave answers, and only 7 of those recognized that water is a risk within every step of the supply chain, of the value chain. Okay. And only one of them, and this was in 2019, if I remember correctly, when we were quite aware of plastic pollutions and microfibers, only one of them said microplastics is an issue, is a risk to them. And this was from voluntary disclosure, right? That's why I'm so happy now that we will have mandatory disclosure. Yeah. Because when companies are forced to start looking into how much water they're consuming, what is their impact, they will have to dig for the data. They will have to engage in conversations with their suppliers. They will have to extract the data from various sources. And what's wonderful is that they're going to feed it into a database. And that's when you can start, extracting knowledge, not just data, not just number. You can extract knowledge. You can start seeing what the sector is doing. You can start seeing who's inefficient and who has the best practices. You will start to create benchmarks. And you will have the necessary information to go maybe to the biggest consumers, to the biggest polluters, and say, look, there's nothing to hide behind anymore. We have the data. We have the best practices. You've done your compliance now. Yeah. What do you do next? How do you move from compliance to opportunity? How do you turn that challenge, that need, into something that's good?
Yeah, great. Yeah, thank you. So I'm going to go a little bit off piece here because we were talking about regional differences in water supply, and I think I can understand how complex that is, but I actually would, given how much time we have left, and also the fact that we'll probably have lots of brands here who are going to be thinking about this, what conditions do you, Graham, do you, Phil, do you, Ioana, need to successfully work with a brand right now? If a brand comes up to you and says, we need to work together, you're going to say, okay, you need to get this in order or this in order. What do you need, Phil, from a brand?
Well, I think that working with brands is very complicated. And Graham would probably say this too, because the brands work with the mills and the product goes into the mills, and the brand is dictating the technology it wants to use. And so you get into a three-way discussion or multiple chain discussion. And so the brands have a really tough choice. I wouldn't want to be a brand because they're trying to maximize shareholder value. Yeah. But at the same time, they have discretion on how they use their profits, et cetera. And so it's a tough conversation because many of the brands, for instance, have foundations and they help a lot of people around the world with lots of money every year. But those people live on the same planet we live on. And so we can't erode the foundation. So where do you use money? Do you use money to help with a technology that saves the planet, or use money to help the people on the planet. It's a tough thing. But you can't, I spend my life in disruptive technology, not the textile industry. And in any early adoption of technology, there's got to be an incentive for technologists to make a change and to make technology that works. And there has to be a cost value. I can show a brand today how the $50 million they might spend on a charity could save 30 billion liters of water a year for 10 years.
Yeah.
And so it's really, from my perspective, if I had a message to the brands, it would be, as I said earlier, don't pretend that the technology doesn't exist. Don't say it's not scalable.
Yeah.
There are options. The price point might be inconvenient at the moment, but it's an inconvenience that we, as inhabitants of the planet, need to address. You know, we've talked about cotton. I have a facility in Amsterdam that I think everybody should watch, because it's the first waterless dyeing facility for polyester in the world. We've had waterless dyeing, CO2 dyeing before, but it needed to be washed prior to going in the dyeing machine. And so MTiX has partnered with a group in Amsterdam, and the only water in that facility is for washing your hands in the toilets.
Okay.
And so it's a polyester facility for automotive polyester as well as fashion, but it's completely waterless. And
Yeah.
so the change can happen. They save 300 million liters of water at capacity per year.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know that I answered your question.
Ooh, well, you
Kind of.
did, but you also reminded me that really, you reminded me of a brand I know that has the most amazing biodiversity plan, but also was just churning out and planning to churn out more clothing. And you kind of almost wondered, if you didn't churn out quite so much clothing, would you do less harm to biodiversity? It was almost like the biodiversity plan and the production levels were kind of working against each other.
Yeah, that's
So,
the challenge.
Yeah, so it's kind of, we are in a time where we have to make some big, bold,
Decision.
courageous choices that push us outside of the status quo. So Graham, I'll just come to you. I think just to answer that original question about what does a brand need for you to be able to work with them, because at one point you said you can actually use existing machinery, which sounded quite phenomenal, actually.
Yeah, it's all existing machinery, and you know, as Phil has said, the relationship between brand and mill can be quite complicated. So for me, life's changed a lot in the last year, in that as we've implemented Fibre 52 into the largest mills around the world, what has happened is the brands initially said to us, please go to this mill and, you know, implement your technology. What's happening now is where we have implemented technology, we're actually introducing those mills to the brands. So the brands are actually moving over into mills that already have Fibre 52. And I think another thing Ioana mentioned is that, you know, in calculation, I think this is a really important point as well. And we work with brand and mill on a daily basis, real time. We spend an enormous amount of time in calculating real time what's happened today in your water supply, what's happened today in your effluent, because a part of Fibre 52 is to take caustic soda out of the system so your effluent is much better. We use bioproduct so your effluent isn't damaged. You know, so again, in water, that's a big deal because we're working with many of these mills to recycle their water in a better way. So, yeah, I mean, our relationship with brand and mill is pretty much equal, both very, very important.
Yeah, thank you. And Ioana, I'm going to open the floor for questions in about a couple of minutes. So what does a brand need to work successfully with water footprint?
What I've noticed in our work with brands, including big global brands and small brands, is that they take what we have to give. They take the data, they take the information, they take the analysis that we do, and they go behind the screens and they huddle and they have their own internal processes, And then very rarely they give us feedback. It's very rare that we understand why they make the choices they do, why they don't implement a solution that's available, why are they not taking the actions that we recommended on how to reduce their water footprint or become more sustainable. And it's easy then to say that they just don't want to. I also agree with what Phil said, that it's very difficult for brands to make not the right choice, but to make a choice, because there are so many out there. But I see there's this lack of feedback, this lack of long-term engagement to help us understand what they need more to make the right decisions.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, thank you. Again, you're speaking to the value of the long-term partnership, of transparency, yeah. Does anyone have any questions? I think we have a roaming mic. Is anyone? No?
I see a question over there.
Oh, great, thank you.
Hello, my name's Lena. I was wondering, are there any ways to incentivize choosing a more sustainable option outside of financial? So even if it is more expensive, are there ways in which we can convince brands that it is worth it?
I mean, this question applies to every panel.
To every panelist, yeah.
I'd love your takes on it. Thank you.
That's, yeah,
Ioana.
I think that's a very good question.
Yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately, I keep coming back to legislation because we see that's what's moving the sector now. And I'm not, a strong believer in very strong invasive governments. I come from a former communist country. I don't want to go back to that sort of system. But I do see that it works. And as Belle said, we need to start making some very courageous decisions. Some business models, I'm sorry, but they don't have the social license or the planetary license to exist. Fast fashion, ultra fast fashion, that should be history. And even if the big companies, and I'm going to name names, H&M, Zara, Shein, for goodness sake, they're saying they're trying to recycle fibers. They're doing good. It's just not possible. It cannot coexist with a sustainable business model. They have to change their business model, and they can continue to exist. They can continue to create value for their shareholders, but they can also do that without causing so much damage to the planet and to the people inhabiting it.
Your question really goes to the nature of humanity, and if we could wave a magic wand and say all consumers will spend more and get less and be happy, then the model could possibly change. The reality is some of those brands you mentioned exist because they have consumers who are unaware or uneducated, or we have people who, rightfully so, it's a real conundrum when you have a business. So let me give you an example. If you save a business water or a step in a process, and now you have machines not running, do you say, oh, I can make more clothes? So now you save water, but what about the landfill or the microplastics or the next step? It's this life cycle discussion of changing one piece of the puzzle now can affect the other piece of the puzzle. But I would argue water is one of the most important pieces of the puzzle we have because it gives us options, life options, to make those other choices.
Graham, do you want to speak to that incredibly big question?
Yes, thanks for the question.
Yeah.
And this is part of my daily life in that, in dealing with the mills around the world, quite often, you'll have a conversation where they say, yeah, we want to be more sustainable, but it better not cost us any more. And part of our calculation is to show in saving water, in saving time, in saving energy, just how much they do save, and also just what a great effect that's having for the ecology of the planet and sustainability. And that's why we're working hard every day to show, it's okay me saying, yes, we can save you 70% of your water. We have to prove that on a daily basis. We have to prove that your effluent's better. We have to prove that your fabric is better. I mean, one thing I haven't mentioned is that we don't destroy the cotton.
Yeah.
So again, it's a cost saving, because when you mention microfibers, with this process, we save there because basically you're getting 4 or 5% more cotton out at the other end because it's not going down the drain. So again, back to cost, back to the question, you've got to look at what can be saved in processing versus one chemical versus another. What does it cost? It's a bigger question.
So I actually forgot to introduce myself. I work across climate justice and animal rights, and a lot of the discussions there are about how to shift people to, and gosh, there's so much to say actually. There's a lot of talk in climate activism about engaging the head, the hand, the heart. So I can give you all the statistics that you need to progress, but unless you sort of really viscerally engage with the benefits of those processes, and also what will happen if you don't engage with those processes. So if you don't engage the heart, for example, then people are unlikely to move. And then the hand is the tactile response, is the responses of all the panelists here actually, is what you do, what you actually do to respond. So I would say head for data and statistics, heart for if we don't sort this out, we're all pretty well messed up, and then hand for the practical engagement with the issue. We have time for one more question. If not, I may. Oh, we got one here.
Thank you very much. That was really fascinating, actually. I actually asked this question at the last panel as well, and I don't know if it was actually taken in the right sort of in the right way, but it kind of strikes me that the power of harnessing the consumer in all of this, really, and actually engaging with them and making sure that they, because everybody in this room, we're all, it's like an echo chamber almost, isn't it?
Yeah.
We're all on the same
I know what you
page.
mean.
But the people who are actually, making the buying decisions on a daily basis are kind of in this hermetically sealed bubble that doesn't get to see the damage. And with all of this stuff that you said now, how do we get, to harness that power? Because if they stop buying this stuff tomorrow, the industry will change very quickly, won't it? So, how do we harness that sort of power for good, if we want to say that?
May I?
What is it with the huge question? I mean, I love it.
Have a
I
simple
absolutely,
answer. Go
these are
ahead.
such fundamental questions. But
Do you want
go
to give
for
the
it.
simple answer first?
Well, I think they're fantastic marketing firms on the planet for a price that could get that message out and make that change. Who's going to pay that bill? Because the reality is that, and I've seen fantastic marketing from major brands outside of textiles and technology, et cetera. The video we just saw of the before and after of a lake disappearing is magic for the right marketing group. But nothing happens in our world anymore without the right messaging and without the right package, without getting over the conspiracy theories of, oh, there wasn't really a lake there. That's CGI. So I think it's a simple answer.
Yeah.
You find the right group to carry the message. The hard part is, who's going to foot that bill and who wants to really get the message out to stop a whole industry.
Yeah.
I'm glad I let you say it first because I agree and I disagree with you.
That's good.
I also used to work a lot with youth groups in the water sector. And in the beginning, I was also young among them. And I had trust in them that if they get access to the right information, they will make the right decisions and it will spread like fire. If you know that the clothes you're buying are impacting the environment so negatively, your own health, if you know that they could be made by children somewhere in a sweatshop, naturally you will take the right decision and not buy it anymore, right? Unfortunately, it's not so. If you see the success of brands like Shein or Temu, it's mind-blowing. And they have the access to this information. The Gen Zers, our future that we look towards, that are so smart, and they still take these wrong decisions because it's so attractive, right? It's cheap, and you want to look cool, and you want to post it on Instagram, and you want to be popular, and that will always win above saving a leg somewhere in Kazakhstan. Where is Kazakhstan anyway, right? For us in the West.
Yeah.
And that also relates to what you were saying about environmental justice. Because again, we're in London, we're talking about all these innovations. But a few months ago, I was in India at MTiX, first of its series, of first-time conference, huge, thousands and thousands of exhibitors there. And I was talking informally with the representative of cotton exporters, and he simply told me, if you Europeans or the Westerners come here and impose on us more of these sustainability standards, you know what? Our internal market is billions of people, and we're growing. So we're just going to sell more to our own internal market, right? And how does that make us feel? Because
So helpless.
we always think about, the poor people in the global south, we have to fight for them. But they're also a big part of the consumer problem.
Yeah.
And how do you solve that problem? So again, I believe and I don't believe in consumer power.
Yeah.
And I believe more in policy and having maybe the political people in place that can make the decisions for the consumer.
Whoa, okay.
Can I just add one final point on from that, actually? Sorry. Does it not just come down to cost then? Can we not put a levy in that, I mean, that sort of stat you said about the 2,000 litres of water, I mean, that's something I've said to my students for many years. And you think, well, you pay for a litre of water in the shops, why isn't a T-shirt £2,700?
Yeah.
Well, that's a real problem because globally there are different policies on water per country. And so I'll have some people say, we don't pay for water. It's free in my country.
Yeah.
And other people say, oh my gosh, you save water. We need your product because water is so expensive, because there's no global standard on the value of a liter of water for industry. There's not even value of a liter of water for self-consumption. Go to the airport and see if it's a dollar per liter. It's $7 for a liter at some airports. So it's a real challenge with no consistency across the globe.
Yeah. Okay, we're almost out of time. I'm just going to wrap up really quickly.
Maybe
Graham.
one small question, if we're above
sure.
time.
We may have to go over time. I'm so sorry. A little bit over time.
It's the end of the show anyway, so maybe if you want to stay.
Thank you so much for mentioning and having this panel on water. First of all, congratulations for that. Belle, you just mentioned that there's no one in here who's talking about the water, but we have at the Innovate table, we have our stall. We're working with natural dyes in India, and we're the industrial pioneers of natural dye application in industries. And thanks, Graham, for pointing out about the caustic soda issue. But in natural dyes, you could actually recycle more than 75% of your water, and it does not pollute water at all. You could actually make it drinking water again.
Yeah.
And our work of so many years, we calculated that we saved 1 year of Mumbai's drinking water. That much water we've saved. So that's one another solution on the pollution of.
We need all of you.
Thank you.
We need all of it,
And
actually. We
thank
need all
you.
solutions.
Yeah. Thank you.
So just to very, very quickly wrap up, in response to Ioana, I do think still that the West has some kind of cultural collateral. The big luxury fashion brands can set tones for consumption. To your point, there are actually advertising agencies or people from the old advertising industry who are trying to use the systems there to offer other visions of the world that don't seem like conventional advertising is all about consume more, eat more, da-da-da-da-da. Purpose disruptors, clean creatives, these are groups that are trying to use some of that messaging. Another point, when I talk in fashion at schools, when I go into schools, actually, I find students incredibly galvanized by inequity. I think they're actually quite shocked sometimes that what they do on an everyday basis is harming people. And I love young people's sense of justice. Finally, go and see the video in Parley, which just shows the most astonishing scenes of natural seas and oceans and all the life there. There's not anyone I know who isn't inspired by that kind of imagery, and there's not anyone who I know who's not completely distressed when they see a dead turtle tangled up in fishing nets. I think it's not far reaching out to that empathy to create change. It's kind of there. We just have to find ways to get to it. But thank you so much, everyone, for being here. And yeah, the end of the event. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye, Graham.
Bye-bye.